Why do anxious people keep choosing partners who can't give them the security they desperately need? If you have an anxious attachment style, you've probably noticed a disturbing pattern in your romantic life. You consistently find yourself drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable, inconsistent with affection, and uncomfortable with the very intimacy you crave most. It's like being thirsty and repeatedly choosing to drink salt water. It temporarily feels like it might help, but it actually makes the problem worse. You tell yourself this time will be different. This person just needs time to open up. They're worth the wait. You can love them into feeling safe, but months later, you find yourself in the exact same dynamic, desperately trying to earn consistent love from someone whose nervous system treats your need for connection as a threat to their survival. You can clearly see healthy, available partners who would probably treat you well. You might even date them occasionally, but somehow those relationships feel boring, lacking in chemistry, or missing some indefinable spark that the unavailable people seem to provide effortlessly. The anxious avoidant dynamic isn't random bad luck or poor judgment. It's a psychological trap that operates below conscious awareness, driven by patterns established in your earliest relationships and reinforced by the particular way your nervous system learned to seek safety and connection. Understanding why this attraction happens doesn't make you weak or broken. It makes you human. Your attachment system developed logical strategies for survival based on early experiences, and those strategies are still running in the background, guiding your romantic choices whether you realize it or not. But here's what nobody tells you about this pattern. The very people who activate your attachment system most strongly are often the least equipped to provide the security that would actually calm that system down. Recognizing this connection is the first step toward making different choices that serve your authentic well-being rather than repeating cycles that leave you emotionally exhausted. The foundation of this addiction lies in the familiar feeling of having to earn love. When you grew up with inconsistent caregiving, parents who were sometimes available and sometimes overwhelmed, distracted, or emotionally unavailable, your nervous system learned that love is something you have to work for rather than something you automatically deserve. This early experience creates what psychologists call an earned security template. Your brain learned that when someone is distant or unavailable, it means you need to try harder, be better, or prove your worth to regain their attention and affection. This became your blueprint for how relationships work. When you meet an avoidant partner, their emotional distance doesn't register as a red flag. It registers as familiar. Your attachment system recognizes the pattern and thinks this is how love works. Their inconsistent availability triggers the same neural pathways that were carved out in childhood when you had to work for your caregiver's attention. The avoidance behavior activates your learned strategy for securing attachment. Pursue, prove your worth, accommodate their needs, minimize your own needs, and eventually they'll give you the consistent love you're seeking. Your nervous system genuinely believes this approach will work because it sometimes worked in childhood. What makes this particularly insidious is that avoidants often do provide just enough intermittent reinforcement to keep this strategy feeling viable. They'll have moments of warmth and connection that feel like proof that your efforts are working, followed by periods of distance that trigger renewed efforts to win them back. This intermittent reinforcement creates what's essentially an addiction cycle in your brain. The unpredictable rewards release dopamine in the same pattern that makes gambling addictive. Your brain interprets the occasional positive response as evidence that you're on the right track, not as evidence that the person is fundamentally unavailable. Meanwhile, when you interact with securely attached people who offer consistent availability and don't require you to earn their affection, it can feel strange or even uncomfortable. Your attachment system doesn't recognize this as real love because it doesn't match the template you learned early on. The addiction deepens because anxious people often mistake intensity for intimacy, and avoidants are masters at creating emotional intensity without genuine vulnerability. The push-pull dynamic of avoidant behavior creates a heightened emotional state that can feel like passionate connection when it's actually just anxiety and uncertainty. When an avoidant pulls away, your attachment system goes into overdrive. Your brain interprets their distance as a threat to your survival, because in evolutionary terms, losing your primary attachment figure was literally life-threatening. This triggers a cascade of stress hormones and intense emotions that feel very much like being deeply in love. The relief you feel when they return or show affection after a period of distance creates a powerful neurochemical reward. The contrast between the anxiety of their absence and the relief of their return makes their attention feel more valuable than it would if it were consistently available. This emotional roller coaster becomes confused with passion and deep connection. You tell yourself that the intensity of your feelings means this person must be the one, or that what you have together is special and worth fighting for. But intensity born from uncertainty and anxiety isn't the same as intimacy born from mutual vulnerability and consistent care. Securely attached people don't create this kind of emotional intensity because they don't activate your threat detection system. Their consistency feels calm rather than exciting. Their availability feels safe rather than thrilling. If you've learned to associate love with anxiety and uncertainty, genuine security can feel boring or lacking in chemistry. This is why many anxious people report feeling more attracted to people who are mysterious or hard to read than to people who are direct about their feelings and intentions. The mystery creates anxiety, which gets interpreted as attraction and romantic tension rather than a warning sign about emotional availability. There's another layer to this addiction that involves an unconscious belief that you need to fix or heal others in order to be worthy of love. This belief usually develops in families where children learn to manage their caregivers' emotions or take responsibility for maintaining family stability. If you grew up feeling responsible for your parents' emotional well-being, or if you learned that your value came from how well you could help, support, or fix others, you'll be unconsciously drawn to partners who seem to need fixing. Avoidants, with their obvious emotional walls and difficulties with intimacy, can seem like perfect candidates for your healing abilities. This dynamic feels meaningful and important to your psyche because it activates your learned sense of purpose and value. Being needed feels like being loved, even when the person's inability to reciprocate consistently leaves you emotionally depleted. You get to feel valuable and important while telling yourself that your love is powerful enough to heal someone's attachment wounds. The belief that you can love someone into emotional availability is intoxicating because it puts you in control of the relationship's outcome. If their healing depends on your love, patience, and understanding, then you have the power to create the secure relationship you want. This illusion of control is preferable to accepting that some people simply aren't capable of providing the kind of connection you need. Avoidants often unconsciously encourage this dynamic by sharing just enough of their emotional wounds or childhood difficulties to make you feel special and chosen as their potential healer. They might tell you that you're different from their exes, that they've never felt this comfortable with anyone before, or that you're helping them learn to trust again. These statements activate your rescue fantasies and make you feel like you're part of their healing journey rather than just another person they're keeping at arm's length. The idea that you could be the one to finally break through their walls and teach them how to love feels romantic and meaningful, even when the evidence suggests they're not actually changing or opening up. When you encounter securely attached people who don't need fixing, it can feel like there's no special role for you to play. If they're already emotionally healthy and available, what unique value do you bring? This can trigger feelings of inadequacy or confusion about your purpose in the relationship. The addiction becomes even more entrenched through a fundamental misunderstanding about what creates safety in relationships. Anxious attachment often develops when early caregivers were inconsistent, sometimes responsive and loving, sometimes distracted, overwhelmed, or emotionally unavailable. This inconsistency taught your nervous system that safety comes from vigilance and effort. You learned to carefully monitor your caregiver's emotional state and adjust your behavior accordingly to maintain their availability. You became skilled at reading subtle cues, managing others' emotions, and working hard to maintain connection. These skills feel familiar and valuable when you're with an avoidant partner. Their emotional distance and inconsistency activate your learned expertise in managing difficult relationship dynamics. You feel competent and useful when you're analyzing their moods, accommodating their needs for space, and working to maintain connection despite their withdrawal. With securely attached partners, these hard-earned skills aren't needed. They communicate directly about their needs and feelings, They don't require careful monitoring or emotional management. They're consistently available and responsive. This can leave you feeling like you don't know how to be in the relationship or what your role should be. Your nervous system might interpret this lack of challenge as evidence that the person doesn't really need you or that the relationship isn't important enough to require effort. The absence of relationship drama or emotional intensity can feel like the absence of real connection to someone whose attachment system learned to equate love with work. This creates a paradox, where the relationships that would actually provide the security you claim to want feel unsafe to your nervous system, while the relationships that recreate childhood patterns of uncertainty and effort feel familiar and important. The avoidance need for space and tendency to withdraw also allows you to maintain some of your own emotional walls while feeling like you're in a relationship. Many anxious people have their own fears of genuine intimacy that get masked by their focus on pursuing emotionally unavailable partners. When you're constantly working to earn someone's love or break through their emotional barriers, you don't have to confront your own capacity for vulnerability and authentic intimacy. The relationship stays focused on their emotional limitations rather than requiring you to examine your own. The addiction is reinforced by confusing the feeling of being chosen by someone selective with genuine compatibility and love. Avoidants are notoriously picky about who they let into their inner circle. They maintain emotional distance from most people and only occasionally allow someone closer access to their thoughts and feelings. When an avoidant person shows you attention or shares something personal with you, it can feel incredibly special and meaningful. Their selectivity makes their attention feel more valuable than the same attention would feel coming from someone who was naturally warm and open with most people. This creates an illusion of being special or chosen that can be intoxicating to anxious people who often struggle with self-worth. Being selected by someone who rarely selects anyone feels like validation of your unique value and worth. It confirms that you're different from all the other people this person has rejected or kept at distance. The reality is that avoidants often choose partners based on who feels safest rather than who they're most compatible with or attracted to. They might choose you not because you're special, but because something about your energy or behavior doesn't trigger their intimacy fears as strongly as other people do. This distinction matters because being chosen for your safety rather than your authentic self creates a relationship dynamic where you unconsciously learn to suppress parts of yourself that might trigger their withdrawal. You start editing your emotional responses, minimizing your needs, and carefully managing your behavior to maintain their comfort with the relationship. Over time, this dynamic erodes your sense of authentic self-expression and creates a relationship where you're constantly performing a version of yourself rather than being genuinely known and accepted. But the feeling of being chosen by someone selective can mask this loss of authenticity for months or years. When securely attached people show interest in you, it might not feel as special because they're generally open and warm with people they like. Their interest doesn't come with the same sense of exclusivity or special selection that makes avoidant attention feel so valuable. The psychological addiction becomes even stronger through what psychologists call trauma bonding, the intense attachment that can form when you experience stress and relief in relationship with the same person. The avoidance pattern of creating distance followed by reconnection creates a psychological bond that can feel stronger and more meaningful than healthier relationship dynamics. When an avoidant partner withdraws, your attachment system perceives this as a threat and floods your body with stress hormones. You experience genuine distress during their periods of distance or emotional unavailability. When they return or show affection again, your nervous system experiences profound relief from this distress. This cycle of stress and relief creates powerful neurochemical bonds. Your brain starts associating this person with both the source of your distress and the relief from that distress. This creates a dependency that can feel like deep love but is actually your nervous system seeking relief from anxiety that this person is creating in the first place. The trauma bonding is strengthened by the unpredictability of the avoidance availability, because you never know when they'll be warm and available versus distant and disconnected. Your nervous system stays in a heightened state of alertness. This chronic activation makes their positive attention feel more intense and meaningful than it would in a more stable dynamic. You might notice that you think about avoidant partners much more obsessively than you think about securely attached partners. This isn't because the connection is deeper or more meaningful, it's because your nervous system is trying to solve the puzzle of their unpredictability and seeking relief from the chronic anxiety their inconsistency creates. This obsessive thinking gets confused with being in love or having found someone special. But the intensity of your mental preoccupation is actually evidence of dysregulation rather than deep compatibility. Healthy relationships don't require constant mental energy devoted to figuring out where you stand or what the other person is thinking and feeling. When you're with securely attached partners, your nervous system can actually relax. There's no puzzle to solve, no inconsistency to manage, no chronic anxiety seeking relief. This calm can feel boring or like something is missing when you've become accustomed to trauma-bonded intensity. The addiction is maintained by an unconscious fear that if someone is easily available and consistently interested, they might not be worth wanting. This belief usually stems from early experiences with caregivers who were overwhelmed or unavailable, which can create an internalized sense that your needs are burdensome or too much. If you learned early on that your emotional needs were sometimes too much for your caregivers to handle, you might develop an unconscious belief that anyone who can easily meet those needs must not be very discerning or valuable themselves. When securely attached, people show consistent interest and availability. Anxious people sometimes worry that this means something is wrong with them. Why aren't they more selective? Why don't they have better options? What's the catch? The ease of the connection can feel suspicious rather than fortunate. Avoidants, on the other hand, confirm your unconscious belief that love should be difficult to obtain and that worthy partners should be challenging to win over. Their resistance to intimacy feels like evidence of their value and desirability. If they're hard to get, they must be worth having. This dynamic creates a situation where you dismiss or lose interest in people who would actually be good partners while pursuing people whose very unavailability seems to prove their worth. You end up working hardest for the relationships that give you the least while taking for granted the people who would gladly give you what you claim to want. The resistance to easy love often stems from a deep fear that if someone can love you without you having to earn it, they might also be able to stop loving you just as easily. Earned love feels more secure because it seems like it's based on your efforts and worthiness rather than just their choice. But this logic is backwards. Relationships where you have to constantly prove your worth are actually less secure because your value in the relationship depends on your performance rather than genuine compatibility and affection. Someone who loves you easily and consistently is showing you that their feelings are based on who you are, not what you do for them. Another layer of the addiction involves mistaking the activation of your attachment system for genuine compatibility or chemistry. When you meet an avoidant person, their emotional unavailability and mixed signals trigger your attachment system into overdrive, creating intense feelings that can feel like falling in love. Your nervous system interprets the anxiety and uncertainty as evidence that this person matters deeply to you. The stress hormones and heightened emotional state feel like passion and meaningful connection. You might experience physical symptoms like racing heart, inability to eat, obsessive thinking, and intense longing that seem to confirm the depth of your feelings. But these intense reactions aren't necessarily about the person themselves. They're about your nervous system responding to perceived threats to attachment. You might experience similar intensity with any avoidant person who activates these same patterns, regardless of your actual compatibility or shared values. When you meet securely attached people, they don't trigger your attachment system because they don't present threats to your sense of connection and safety. Your nervous system can remain calm and regulated, which might feel like a lack of chemistry or spark when you've learned to associate love with anxiety. This is why many anxious people report feeling like securely attached partners are nice but boring, or that there's no chemistry, even when they logically recognize that these would be better relationship choices. The absence of anxiety gets interpreted as the absence of attraction rather than the presence of safety. Learning to distinguish between attachment activation and genuine compatibility is crucial for breaking these patterns. Real chemistry is about shared values, natural conversation flow, mutual attraction, and feeling genuinely seen and appreciated for who you are. It shouldn't require constant anxiety about where you stand or whether the person will be available tomorrow. The addiction becomes self-perpetuating when anxious people organize their entire sense of self-worth around their ability to maintain relationships, especially difficult ones. If you learned early that your value came from how well you could meet others' needs or manage challenging dynamics, your self-esteem becomes tied to your relationship success. When you successfully navigate an avoidant partner's emotional walls or get them to open up occasionally, it feels like evidence of your worth and competence. You're proving to yourself that you're valuable enough to break through someone's defenses and skilled enough to manage complex emotional dynamics. This creates an addictive cycle where your self-worth depends on relationship achievements rather than intrinsic value. Each small breakthrough with an avoidant partner, getting them to share something personal, having them choose you over someone else, or getting them to express affection, becomes evidence that you're worthy and valuable. The challenge is that this pattern requires you to constantly prove your worth rather than simply receiving love based on who you are. Your self-esteem becomes dependent on your performance in the relationship rather than on genuine acceptance and appreciation from a partner who sees your authentic value. With securely attached partners, there's less opportunity for these dramatic proof-of-worth moments because they're already consistently available and appreciative. Their steady affection doesn't provide the same ego boost as occasionally winning over someone who's typically withholding. This creates a situation where healthy relationships can feel less rewarding to your sense of accomplishment and self-worth, even though they're much better for your actual emotional well-being. You have to learn to derive self-esteem from sources other than relationship achievements and to value being loved for who you are rather than what you can accomplish. The deepest layer of this addiction involves unresolved grief about early attachment injuries that gets projected onto romantic relationships. If your early caregivers were inconsistently available due to depression, addiction, work stress, or other overwhelming circumstances, you might still be unconsciously trying to heal those original wounds. Your attachment system keeps seeking out situations that remind you of those early dynamics because there's an unconscious hope that this time you'll be able to fix it. If you can just love this unavailable person enough, be patient enough, or prove your worth sufficiently, maybe you'll finally get the consistent love and security you needed as a child. This dynamic turns romantic relationships into therapy sessions where you're unconsciously trying to heal your childhood wounds through current partners. But avoidant partners can't give you the security you missed early on, no matter how much you love them or how hard you try to earn their consistent affection. The original wound needs to be grieved and healed through other means: therapy, secure friendships, self-compassion work, or reparenting yourself. Romantic relationships can't undo what happened in your formative years, and expecting them to do so puts impossible pressure on both you and your partners. This is why breaking anxious avoidant patterns often requires doing deep work on your relationship with yourself and your early attachment experiences. You have to learn to give yourself the security and consistent care that you're seeking from others before you can recognize and appreciate partners who are actually capable of reciprocating love consistently. Until you address the underlying attachment injuries, you'll likely continue being drawn to people who activate your familiar patterns of pursuit and anxiety rather than people who offer genuine partnership and mutual care. Understanding these psychological mechanisms doesn't automatically solve the problem, but it does give you the awareness needed to start making different choices. When you can recognize that your attraction to unavailable people is based on learned patterns rather than genuine compatibility, you can begin to question those patterns instead of following them blindly. The goal isn't to force yourself to be attracted to people who don't appeal to you, but rather to examine whether your definition of attraction has been shaped by anxiety and familiar dysfunction rather than authentic connection and compatibility. Learning to notice when your attachment system becomes activated in the early stages of dating can help you make more conscious choices. If you find yourself obsessively thinking about someone, feeling anxious about their responses to texts, or experiencing physical symptoms of anxiety around someone you've just met, these are warning signs that your attachment wounds are being triggered rather than genuine compatibility being activated. Practice staying present with the discomfort that might arise when dating securely attached people. If someone feels too available or too easy, try to sit with that discomfort rather than immediately losing interest. Ask yourself what you're afraid would happen if someone actually wanted to be with you consistently. Work on developing your own emotional security independent of romantic relationships. This might involve therapy, building secure friendships, developing self-soothing skills, or learning to meet your own emotional needs in healthy ways. The more secure you feel within yourself, the less you'll need relationships to provide security, and the more you'll be able to recognize and appreciate genuine partnership. Practice identifying your authentic preferences and needs in relationships separate from what feels familiar or exciting. What do you actually want in a partner when you're not trying to heal old wounds or prove your worth? What kind of daily life do you want to share with someone? What values and life goals matter to you beyond the drama of pursuit and uncertainty? Be patient with yourself as you work to change deeply ingrained patterns. Your nervous system learned these strategies for good reasons, and it will take time and practice to develop new responses to potential partners. You might still feel drawn to unavailable people sometimes, but you can learn to recognize those feelings as information about your past rather than guidance for your future. Remember that you deserve relationships where love is freely given rather than constantly earned, where your emotional needs are met with consistency rather than occasional breadcrumbs, and where you can be your authentic self rather than a carefully managed version designed to avoid triggering someone's intimacy fears. Breaking free from anxious avoidant patterns isn't about settling for less chemistry or accepting boring relationships. It's about discovering what real chemistry feels like when it's not mixed with anxiety, and learning to value relationships where you're genuinely wanted rather than just occasionally tolerated. Your attachment system learned to associate love with difficulty because that was the only kind of love available to you early on. But you have the power to teach it new associations by choosing relationships that provide the security and consistency you actually need to thrive. The journey from anxious attachment to secure relationship patterns isn't always easy, but it's one of the most important investments you can make in your long-term happiness and emotional well-being. You deserve to experience love that doesn't require you to constantly prove your worth or manage someone else's capacity for intimacy. When you finally find yourself in a relationship where love is given freely, where your emotional needs are met consistently, and where you don't have to work constantly to maintain connection, you'll understand the difference between attachment addiction and genuine love. The peace and joy of secure attachment is worth every difficult step it takes to get there. Have you recognized these patterns in your own relationship history and noticed how anxiety can feel like attraction? Share in the comments what insights you've gained about your own attachment patterns and what steps you're taking to build healthier relationship choices. If this helped you understand why you might be drawn to emotionally unavailable partners, like this video and subscribe for more insights about breaking free from cycles that don't serve your authentic well-being. Thanks for watching.